I want you to pay close attention to what I'm about to share with you, because it might be the thing that finally explains the silence that has been keeping you awake. It might explain the distance that somehow feels heavier and louder than any argument ever could. It might explain the behavior that has left your heart searching for answers long after the people around you have stopped asking questions and moved on with their lives. There are moments in life when a person does not communicate the truth through their words. They communicate it through their behavior, through the small and seemingly unimportant choices they make every single day. There are moments when the heart moves in a language so quiet and so layered that only something deeper than the thinking mind can pick it up and understand it. And there are times when someone is trying, really and urgently trying, to tell you something they do not have the words for. Not through a rehearsed speech, not through a clean and organized confession, but through confusion, through hesitation, through a kind of emotional resistance that keeps circling back on itself, through disappearing and then reappearing, through pushing away and then pulling close, through warmth that arrives suddenly and cold that replaces it just as suddenly, through silence that somehow says more than speaking ever did. That is where the real truth lives. Not in the clean and clear statement that never gets made, in the pattern underneath everything, in the contradictions, in the pauses between words, in what a person cannot bring themselves to say and what they keep returning to without knowing why. If you have been sitting with the question of whether someone still thinks about you, if you have been wondering why they seem to disappear and then come back like a sentence that got abandoned halfway through, if you have been asking yourself why they act like they have no feelings and then suddenly display more feeling than they know what to do with, then stay with me, because the answer you have been looking for might already be visible. It might not be in a message they finally sent or in an apology they never gave. It might be living inside the contradiction itself, and once you learn to read it, everything changes. Here is what your person is quietly and desperately trying to communicate to you. They are not as settled as they appear. They are not as unmoved as they want you to believe. They are not as untouched as they perform for the world. Something in them is awake. Something in them has been disturbed in a way that it was not disturbed before you came along. Something has been stirred, something has come alive, something has been shaken loose that was supposed to stay neatly in place. And when a person cannot look at an uncomfortable truth directly, when they cannot face it head-on, that truth starts finding other exits. It seeps out through behavior. It shows up in the way they hesitate. It appears in the thoughts that will not leave them alone no matter how busy they keep themselves. It surfaces in dreams. It reveals itself in the way they keep circling back to you, keep checking on you from a distance, keep maintaining just enough connection to never fully let go, while also never fully coming close. One of the most important things psychology has ever taught us is that the conscious mind is one of the most accomplished liars in the world, while the unconscious tells the truth with a kind of brutal and indifferent honesty. A person can say with complete confidence that they do not care, while everything their body does tells a completely different story. A person can tell themselves and the people around them that they are fully over it, that they have closed the chapter and moved on, while their mind returns to you in the quiet hours of the night, with the same persistence that a river returns to the same path after rain. A person can say out loud that they do not miss you, while the tiniest and most human details of their daily life betray them. The way they react when your name appears somewhere unexpected, the way they pause before they answer a question about you, the way a certain song or smell or time of day still moves something in them that nothing else touches. They may not be in a place where they can admit the truth to you, but that does not mean the truth is absent. It means the truth is being pushed down, and resistance, genuine resistance, the kind that costs someone energy to maintain, is one of the clearest signs that something real is happening beneath the surface. Think about that honestly. Why would anyone invest effort in resisting something that carries no weight? Why would anyone feel the need to prove they are indifferent, to justify an absence, to defend a distance, if the thing they are running from was never real in the first place? People do not protect themselves this aggressively from things that mean nothing. They protect themselves from the things that mean the most. They build their walls most carefully around the doors they are most afraid to open. When something reaches into the hidden parts of a person, when it touches a fear they have never fully healed, when it wakes up something in them they were not prepared to feel and cannot afford to lose, they react by withdrawing, by hardening, by creating confusion as a kind of defense, by testing the connection without admitting they are testing it, by going quiet as if silence gives them back the control that feeling took away. But silence is not control. Silence is delay. It does not make the emotion disappear. It simply drives it underground, where it continues to move and shape behavior from a place the person cannot see clearly. And that is why your person may be sitting with a truth they cannot say plainly. A truth that sounds something like this: "You matter to me more than I am ready to acknowledge out loud." That is an enormous thing for a proud heart to carry. That is a genuinely frightening thing for a heart that has been hurt before. That is the kind of truth that can turn a person into a walking contradiction, reaching for you with one hand while pulling away with the other. Part of them remembers the comfort of being near you, the sense of connection, the specific and irreplaceable feeling of being understood. Another part of them remembers what it costs to be that open, the vulnerability, the risk of being fully seen, the possibility of being hurt from a place that had been left unguarded. And when those two parts of a person are in direct conflict with each other, the person becomes divided. They are no longer speaking with one voice. One part says, "Go back." One part says, "Do not put your heart in that position again." One part says, "Be honest." One part says, "Stay hidden and stay safe." Living inside that kind of inner conflict is genuinely exhausting. It uses up enormous amounts of energy. And when someone is fighting that war inside themselves, the way they behave toward the people who matter to them becomes confusing almost by default. But confusion, and this is the part most people miss, is not always evidence that something is absent. Sometimes confusion is evidence that something is simply overwhelming the person experiencing it. Sometimes the person who confuses you most is the person who feels most deeply and has the least understanding of how to hold it, how to express it, how to live inside it without being destroyed by it. When a person has no language for what they are feeling, they translate those feelings into behavior. They come close and then vanish. They signal interest and then become unreachable. They start a conversation and then retreat the moment it becomes emotionally real. They ask questions and then shy away from the answers. They say just enough to keep the connection breathing, but never enough to make themselves truly visible. And while this can look like cruelty from the outside, it is not always that. Sometimes what looks like cruelty is simply fear trying to survive. Sometimes what looks like a performance of not caring is actually pain that has not learned how to stand in the open without falling apart. There is a fundamental idea in the psychology of the unconscious that suggests what we refuse to face does not go away. It does not resolve itself politely in the background while we pretend it is not there. Instead, it grows in the places we cannot see. It waits. It continues to shape the choices we make and the ways we behave. It runs the same emotional story on a loop until we are finally forced to turn around and look at it directly. That is why some people keep returning to the same person, the same dynamic, the same unfinished emotional situation. They are not simply returning to a person they care about. They are returning to the place where something in them was left unresolved. They are returning to the site of a truth that is still waiting to be acknowledged. Your person may be trying to say something that sounds like this inside their own mind. There is something I feel that I do not know how to carry. Not, I have nothing to say. Not, there is nothing here. But exactly the opposite. There is too much here. And it unsettles me in a way I cannot manage. That is the hidden confession behind so many cold surfaces. The strongest feelings very often produce the coldest behavior because the feeling is too large and the person is not yet large enough on the inside to hold it without shutting down. What looks like distance may actually be a very deliberate and very frightened form of self-protection. What looks like pride may actually be someone terrified of being rejected if they show their real face. What looks like indifference may actually be an attachment so powerful It feels genuinely dangerous to admit. What looks like a quiet person who has moved on may actually be a mind full of your name and a chest full of unspoken conflict that never fully quiets down. If you have ever loved someone who was emotionally complicated, and most of us have, then you already know this at a level deeper than logic. You know that some people are not difficult because they are cold. They are difficult because they feel in a way that frightens them. They feel in a way that strips away the carefully constructed self-image they rely on. They feel in a way that forces them to come face to face with parts of themselves they have been very successfully avoiding for a very long time. And when love becomes a mirror, not everyone has the courage to keep looking at their own reflection. Sometimes people back away from what they see, not because the image is ugly, but because the image is uncomfortably honest. That is the psychology of projection working quietly beneath the surface. People often believe they are reacting to you, but what they are frequently reacting to is the part of themselves that you have woken up. You may have become a mirror held up to their own unfulfilled longing. You may have touched a memory of closeness they never properly grieved or healed from. You may have stirred a desire in them that they cannot get back under control, no matter how much distance they put between you. You may have shown them their own shadow, the hidden interior space where their fear and their tenderness and their need and their shame all live together in an uncomfortable and unresolved tangle. And once that mirror appears in someone's life, many people will step back from it. But stepping back from a mirror does not break it. It does not make the reflection untrue. It only means the truth was too vivid and too immediate to sit with comfortably. So when your person pulls away, resist the automatic conclusion that they have simply stopped thinking about you. When they go silent, resist the assumption that nothing is happening inside them. When they act distant and detached, try not to assume the heart has followed the behavior and gone equally quiet. Very often, the truth is the inverse of what the surface is showing. The more emotionally significant a connection is, the more terrifying it becomes for someone who has never developed the inner capacity to face that kind of significance without flinching. Some people leave because they genuinely feel nothing, but a great many people leave because what they feel is so large it overwhelms them. Some people end things because they are finished, but others walk away while still completely unfinished inside themselves, carrying every unresolved piece of the connection into every day that follows. And unfinished people create unfinished connections. They send mixed signals because they are genuinely mixed on the inside. They offer you their presence and their absence sometimes in the very same moment. They make you feel chosen and then suddenly make you feel invisible. They make you feel like you are truly seen and then behave as though you are a stranger. And the painful thing, the thing that cuts deepest, is that this has nothing to do with your worth. What it reflects is their own inability to love without feeling like they are handing over something they will never get back. Here is what they know, even if they will never say it. They know that something in them has been affected. They may not know how deeply they have moved you, but they absolutely know you have moved something in them that was not moving before. That is what all the confusing behavior is actually communicating. Not in clean and organized language, not in a speech they rehearsed and delivered, but in patterns that keep repeating until the person who is watching closely enough finally sees the emotional truth underneath. They want closeness, but closeness requires a level of exposure they are not sure they can survive. They want certainty, but certainty requires honesty. And honesty requires looking at things they have been avoiding. They want genuine connection, but genuine connection requires a kind of surrender that feels like losing control. They want to be understood, but to be understood, you have to show the parts of yourself you have been working hardest to keep hidden, even from your own awareness. And so they stay suspended between wanting and defending, between what they feel and what they are afraid that feeling will cost them, between the part of them that reaches toward you and the part of them that has convinced itself that reaching out only ends in pain. In that suspended place, you become the question they cannot answer. You become the memory they cannot overwrite, no matter how many other experiences they layer on top of it. You become the feeling they cannot bring fully under their own control. And strangely, your absence may disturb them more than your presence ever managed to. Not because you matter less when you are present, but because when you are gone, the part of their mind that was managing its feelings through routine and distraction suddenly has nothing to work with. The silence has room in it. The unconscious mind begins to speak. The careful wall of daily life loses its usefulness, and the thoughts of you return on their own schedule, in fragments, in images, in a heaviness in the chest that arrives without warning and refuses to explain itself. This is how the deeper layers of the human mind work. They do not send formal announcements. They do not wait for an appropriate time. They return as a recurring thought that has no good reason to be there. They return as a dream that leaves a specific feeling behind even after the details dissolve. They return as a sudden urge to check on you, to know how you are, to reach out and then stop halfway through and put the phone down. The internal life has its own logic, and it does not answer to pride. It does not obey the confident declaration of having moved on. It asks only one honest question, which is this: what is still unresolved here? And in so many relationships, what is unresolved is not the absence of feeling, it is the fear of what real feeling demands from you. They return and they withdraw and they reach and they retreat. And through all of that movement, all of that circling, they are communicating something they cannot say directly. Something that sounds like this: I am not fully in command of what I feel, and that terrifies me. This is where so many people fundamentally misread what they are experiencing. They expect love to be clear. They expect it to show up organized and articulate and sure of itself. They expect it to arrive with the right words at the right time and say exactly what it means. But some of the most genuine love in human experience arrives wounded. It arrives frightened. It arrives in pieces, struggling to hold itself together inside a person who has not yet learned how to carry it with both hands. Sometimes love sounds exactly like hesitation. Sometimes it sounds like avoidance. Sometimes love looks like a person who cannot fully leave but cannot fully arrive either, because the space between staying and going feels like the only place they know how to be. Sometimes love hides itself inside a pattern of returning over and over to the same person, the same conversation, the same unresolved feeling, because the heart is trying to find its way home to something the mind does not know how to name. When your person keeps coming back in some form, even if it is not physical, even if it only shows up as curiosity, as an indirect message, as someone mentioning your name, as an emotional echo that travels to you through people who know you both, that may be the deeper self trying to communicate that the connection was never finished at the point where the ego decided it should be finished. Do not confuse ongoing emotional movement with insignificance. Do not confuse silence with an empty interior. Do not confuse distance with absence. Do not confuse a composed surface with a peaceful heart, because people can look completely put together while something inside them is coming undone. People can look utterly indifferent while wrestling with a level of inner conflict that is quietly reshaping the way they understand themselves. That is why the person you are thinking about may seem so inconsistent. They are not necessarily playing games the way people usually imagine when they use that phrase. Sometimes what looks like a game from the outside is simply survival from the inside. Sometimes the person is trying to survive their own inner life, trying to stay honest without feeling completely exposed, trying to stay close without losing the version of themselves that depends on not being close, trying to love without waking up the old injury that insists with complete confidence that love always ends in the same way. But here is a truth that cuts through all of it. If a feeling has the power to disturb someone's peace, it has the power to demand their attention. If your presence in someone's life has become something they genuinely cannot ignore or dismiss or process and put away, then you are not dealing with something small. You are dealing with something that has entered the interior world and started reorganizing it from the inside. The psyche, the deep and authentic self, is always moving toward wholeness. It is always trying to integrate what has been split apart. It is always trying to bring the hidden things into the light. And very often, other people are the mechanism through which that process happens. A person enters your life not only as company, but as a catalyst. They activate what was dormant. They surface what was buried. They bring you face to face with the things in yourself that had been waiting patiently to be seen. So when your person struggles to tell you what is happening in them, it may be because the connection between you has pushed them directly into their own internal division. One part wants one thing. Fear wants another. The past wants safety. The soul wants honesty. The ego wants control. And all of that conflict together can silence a person more completely than any deliberate choice to stay quiet ever could. They sit in the silence, hoping that time will do what courage has not yet been willing to do. But time does not heal what stays hidden. Time only brings it closer to the surface. And if you have been patient long enough, you may already be watching the revelation happen in real time. In the repeated glance, in the opportunity that keeps getting missed, in the message that finally arrives slightly too late, in the apology that comes in fragments over a long period, rather than whole and complete at once, in the way they reference you indirectly, in the way they preserve a space for you even while telling themselves and others they have moved forward. What they are trying to communicate runs something like this. This is not as finished as I have been pretending. You reached further into me than I was prepared for. Something in me is still active around you, still listening, still responding, still remembering. My heart has not received the final message my pride keeps trying to send it. And perhaps the most quietly devastating truth in all of this is that they may not be ready to do anything about it. They may not be ready to act, and yet they are absolutely not untouched. They may not be ready to say it, and yet they are absolutely not silent inside. They may not be ready to come back in the way you are waiting for, and yet they are absolutely not free from whatever it is between you. So what do you do with this? You do not chase. You do not position yourself inside someone else's confusion and wait there indefinitely as though their readiness determines your worth. You do not reduce yourself to fit inside the narrow space their fear has left available. You do not mistake emotional turbulence for genuine commitment. You do not allow someone else's inability to name what they feel to become the basis on which you measure your own value. What you do instead is see clearly. You recognize and honor the reality that some people experience very deep feelings without having the strength or the tools to express them with any kind of integrity. You understand that the conflict happening inside another person is not a reflection of who you are. Their inability to find the words for what they feel does not mean you were never significant. Their silence is not the final authority on your worth. Their confusing behavior is not a measurement of how lovable you are. Their unresolved interior is not your failure. This is one of the most liberating things a person can genuinely absorb. Not everyone who loves you will love you in a way that serves you. Not everyone who feels something will be equipped to handle it in a way that is fair to you. Not everyone who returns is actually ready for what returning means. Not everyone who misses you will ever find the courage to say so. Not everyone who carries you in their thoughts will ever arrive with the kind of integrity that translates feeling into something trustworthy and stable, and not everyone who is divided on the inside can offer you anything resembling peace on the outside. Which means your job is to learn a different kind of listening. Listen to the pattern rather than waiting for the perfect statement. Listen to what keeps repeating rather than what occasionally gets said. Listen to what is communicated in the spaces where words disappear. Pay attention to what remains when the noise settles. Notice what your own body does when you think about them. Notice what your deeper knowing registers before your hope has a chance to talk it out of what it already understands. Because sometimes the part of you that knows things knows them well before the part of you that wants things is ready to listen. Sometimes your peace has already identified someone's instability while your attachment is still making arguments for why things might be different. Sometimes the truest information arrives not through a speech but through a feeling you cannot explain and cannot shake. Your person has been trying to tell you in the only imperfect and frightened language available to them that they were changed by you, that something that was settled in them became unsettled, that they were confronted in the most interior and private way with something they had worked very hard to keep at a safe distance. They were awakened to something they may have spent years successfully avoiding, and because of that, The way you exist in them now is not the way ordinary memories exist. It goes deeper than affection. It goes deeper than the simple ache of missing someone. It reaches into the place where the encounter with you became an encounter with themselves, with their own unfinished edges and their own capacity for something real. Some people don't leave your life cleanly. They stay embedded in your emotional memory as reference points that change how you see love, yourself, and connection. Their silence and inconsistency still carry meaning, because emotions that are real don't disappear just because they're not clearly expressed. They show up through distance, return, hesitation, and inner conflict. Once you understand this, you stop chasing words for clarity and start reading the patterns for truth. What remains is the recognition that their feelings, fears, and unresolved emotions are still present, and that silence itself has been communicating all along.